Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new or simply not yet subscribed, I'm Brittany, and definitely make sure to hit that subscribe button. I have been sick for what feels like forever now, and I'm still slightly congested, so just bear with me. But with that, if you love Greek mythology, you will love this video because we're diving in to the Nereids. So Nereids are one of many different types of nymphs in Greek mythology. There are said to be 50 of them, and they're said to be very playful. They love dancing and games. They're these beautiful young maidens that have long flowing hair and graceful bodies. They're said to have these shimmering iridescent scales and webbed fingers and toes, which allow them to swim effortlessly in the depths of the sea. The Nereids' beauty is said to be unmatched, and they are often compared to mermaids. They're the children of Nereus, for whom they're obviously named after. He was the oldest son of Gaia, and she's essentially like Mother Earth. And his father was Pontus, so she had a kid with her son. Yeah. But in some legends, Pontus is also referred to as his brother. I don't know, maybe because that technically, even if that is his dad, it's also his brother, which is so disturbing in so many ways. But he was the primordial god of the sea. And Nereus was often referred to as the old man of the sea. This predated the reign of the gods, which obviously are like Zeus and Poseidon. So this is like pre-Poseidon. When the gods took over from the Titans, Poseidon would become the god of the sea, and Nereus and Pontius would be minor gods under Poseidon's rule. The mother of Nereids was Doris. She was one of 3,000 Oceanids. And Doris's parents, Oceanus and Tethys, I'm butchering so many names right now, but they were the primordial gods of fresh water. Nereids were commonly found in the Mediterranean Sea or sunning themselves on the rocks. Their primary role was to act as attendants to Poseidon, so they would often be seen at his side. And although they're often associated with the Mediterranean Sea and could often be found there, they were also believed to be tied to the Aegean Sea, which is where their father had their palace. And even though they're said to only be 50 Nereids, people kind of get a little lost on what exactly all of their names were. There is no conclusive list of all 50 in any ancient text. But even with the lack of knowing each one of their names, we do know that they are tied to personification of a particular attribute of the sea. For example, Melit was the calm sea, Actea was the seashore, and Eulimene was good harboring. Nereids could also shapeshift, so they could appear as dolphins, seals, or other sea creatures. And they're often seen riding sea creatures, and in other depictions, they are carrying tridents. The earliest mention of these majestical beings was in a work of Hesiod's. He was a Greek poet from the 8th century BCE, and in his work, Theogony, he describes the Nereids as daughters of Nereus and Doris, and says that they're sister of the Nereids, who are a young sea god who was transformed into a shellfish by Aphrodite. They're also mentioned in the works of Homer, which was a Greek poet. I feel like Homer is extremely well known. Like Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, and they are in the Odyssey. He's also lived in the 8th century BCE. But they're in the Odyssey, and he describes them as sea nymphs who are associated with sea and its bounty. And it's believed that they can control the tides and the waves, along with creatures that live in the ocean. They also have the ability to predict storms, which allows them to guide sailors to safety, and are often associated with protection. Nereids are also known for their singing, and it's said that their song can calm the roughest of seas and soothe the most troubled souls. Their songs are said to be hauntingly beautiful, and many sailors have even been lured to their death by it. They're also mentioned in the works of the plays of Euripides and the poetry of Ovid. In these, they are playful and mischievous, and they use their powers to torment and tease sailors. But on the other hand, they're kind and compassionate. They're protective. Nereids were actually looked at as sea goddesses, which not all nymphs are looked at as goddesses, but Nereids were. They were worshipped in rituals and ceremonies. These rituals were to honor the Nereids and ask for their blessing and protection while the sailor was at sea. Sailors would often make offerings before embarking on their voyage, and they were just hoping to gain the favor of the goddesses and have a safe journey. Individual Nereids would be credited in saving individual sailors. However, if an entire ship was at risk, it was common for Nereids to kind of band together to help save the ship. During Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece, Hera asked the Nereid Thetis to help the Argo navigate through the wandering rocks. The nymphs helped, and they enjoyed doing it. Thetis controlled the rudders and steered the ship, and her sisters leapt through the waves, churning up the water. The passage goes, but just as they were about to strike the rocks, the sea nymphs, holding their skirts up over their white knees, began to run along on top of the reefs and breaking the waves, following each other at intervals on either side of the ship. Argo, caught in the current, was tossed to right and left. Angry seas rose up all around her and crashed down on the rocks, which at one moment soared into the air like peaks, and at the next were submerged fast at the bottom of the sea. But the Nereids, passing the ship from hand to hand and side to side, kept her scudding through the air on top of the waves. It was like that game that young girls play beside a sandy beach, when they roll up their skirts up to the waist on either side and toss a ball round to one another, throwing it high in the air so it never touches the ground. They're also associated with fertility, which makes perfect sense because water is known to be associated with fertility, and they'd often be invoked in fertility rites. They were also associated with beauty, grace, and femininity, and they would be compared to mermaids, but they were different. Mermaids tend to have fishtails and a female upper half, while Nereids are depicted at looking completely human. They're also said to be more benevolent and kind, where mermaids are often seen as dangerous and seductive. So now you know what a Nereid is. Let's dive into some famous accounts. Two of the most well-known Nereids are Amphitrite and Thetis. They're both described as stunningly beautiful, maybe even more so than their sisters. Poseidon saw Amphitrite dancing with her sisters, and he wanted her to become his wife. She didn't want to be married though, so she decided to hide in the waters of her grandfather, Oceanus. His palace was at the furthest end of his river, so she thought she could escape Poseidon. But she would be found by the dolphin god Delphin, who would immediately go and tell Poseidon where she was. In some versions, Poseidon forced Amphitrite to marry him, but in other versions, Delphin reassured Amphitrite of Poseidon's wishes, what his actual intentions were, and she married him willingly. But when she married him, she would become Queen of the Seas. Depictions of her show her looking very similar to her sisters, except she has a crown on top of her head. Amphitrite gave birth to the sea god Triton and 3 daughters, but she was looked at as the mother of all sea creatures. All dolphins, seals, fish, and shellfish were considered her children. She was known for her kind demeanor, unlike some other goddesses that even extended Poseidon's children with other women. When King Minos of Crete refused to believe that Theseus was the son of Poseidon, he tossed a gold ring into the sea and told him to go after it. Theseus didn't even ask for protection from his dad, but Amphitrite and her sisters decided to protect him. Her dolphins guided Theseus to Poseidon's underwater palace and presented him with royal gifts, including the ring. And while Amphitrite might have been the queen of the seas, Thetis was the leader of the Nereids. Thetis was once loved by Zeus, but he wouldn't marry her. There was a prophecy that his son with her would overthrow him. Since he overthrew his own father, Kronos, he didn't want to repeat history. So instead, he married his sister. Thetis would become a foster mother to Hera's son, Hephaestus, when he was thrown from Mount Olympus. And when Dionysus was in danger, she would hide him in a bed of seaweed until he was safe again. Thetis would eventually be married to a human named Peleus. Originally, she refused to do this and even changed her form, but eventually she agreed. Their wedding was monumental, but mostly because of the fact that it started a war. Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited. So she sent a golden apple that caused a feud between Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. The judgment of Paris was meant to end the bickering of the goddesses, but it actually resulted in Helen and Paris eloping, which then started the Trojan War. Thetis is the mother of Achilles, which is also what the Achilles heel is named after. And if you don't know why, we're going to get into that. There was a prophecy that said that the son of Thetis would either have a long and uneventful life or a short but glorious one. Thetis did everything in her power to try to make sure that her son would have a long life. When Achilles was born, she tried to make her son immortal by using ambrosia and fire to burn away the mortal part of him. Peleus discovered her, and this was at the end of the ritual, and thought that she was harming the child. But because she was never able to complete the ritual, Achilles was left with one mortal part, and that was his heel. Thetis would flee back to her father's palace, but she would still look over her son. And when the Trojan War broke out, she even attempted to hide Achilles by disguising him as a boy. But he would be discovered by Odysseus, and she had asked Hephaestus to make him a shield and protect him as much as possible. Throughout the war, Thetis would advise her son and console him over lost soldiers. When he defiled the body of the Trojan War hero Hector, Thetis was the one that convinced him to return it. In the end, Achilles would have a short but glorious life. He would be killed by Paris when he was shot with an arrow at the single mortal part of him, his heel. And thus we have the Achilles tendon. So your Achilles heel. And Achilles heel is also like a saying for your weak point, like it's your Achilles heel. After the death of her son, Thetis would rejoin her sisters. Thetis would also reappear in the Argonautica, which was the story of Jason and the Argonauts and their quest for the Golden Fleece. Thetis guided the Argo through the dangers of Scylla and Charybdis, and another famous Nereid is Galatea, and she was pursued by the Cyclops Polyphemus. This is the same Cyclops that Odysseus would encounter and make blind. Galatea was not in love with him, even though he had advances. But she was in love with Acis. So the Cyclops decided to kill him by crushing him with a boulder. That resulted in Galatea transforming Acis into a river. In some versions, Galatea was wooed by the Cyclops, and in these versions, it seems like they would have been a good match. And although the Nereids were often seen for being kind and known for their goodness, it doesn't mean that you can't get on their bad side. Cassiopeia was the queen of Ethiopia. And she was beautiful, but she claimed that she, or in some cases her daughter, was even more beautiful than the Nereids. And this was an insult that many other goddesses had encountered before or heard before, and it never ended well. You did not utter those words that you were more beautiful or more dashing or whatever than a goddess or god. Because they don't take it lightly. I mean, if you kind of think about it, if somebody walked up to you and was like, I'm prettier than you, that hurts. Even if it was true, you don't do that. Like, that's so unacceptable. But Poseidon was married to Amphitrite, which was a Nereid. So he took responsibility into his own hand to defend his wife and her sisters. First, he sent a great flood to cover the land, and then sent Cetus, which was this great sea monster, to literally attack the people of Ethiopia. The floods would destroy the crops and the buildings, and it left more water behind so the monster could swim in it, get closer, and attack. King Cephas was told that the only way to end the attack and save his kingdom was to sacrifice his own daughter to the monster. So Andromeda was stripped naked and tied to rocks along the seashore, and Cetus would start approaching. But in that moment, Perseus was passing through from killing Medusa, and when he saw the princess, he came to her rescue. Perseus had been allowed to borrow winged sandals from Hermes, which gave him the ability to fly at great speed. And he attacked the monster and killed it before it harmed the princess. One legend says that after the fight had ended, that he had laid Medusa's head on a bed of seaweed, which immediately turned to stone, and that the Nereids were so intrigued by this that they continued to do this, and then coral was created. Perseus and Andromeda fell in love, and her father agreed to let them be married. I mean, he did just save his daughter and the rest of the city. I would be surprised if he said no. Andromeda had been previously betrothed to her uncle, though, who said that since she was still alive, that he still had claim to her. But Perseus and Andromeda was still married. The Nereids also share a lot of similarities with other water deities from other mythologies. In Hindu mythology, there are water nymphs that are known as Asparas, who are similar to Nereids in the way that they are beautiful and associated with water. In Norse mythology, there are water spirits known as Nereid that are similar to the Greek ones, which are similar in almost every way. So, if you guys want me to do more mythology videos, make sure to comment down below. Commenting, liking, subscribing, sharing, even watching. It helps me out so much, and I'm so appreciative of it. And until my next one, I love you guys. Bye.